Christine Turner, you directed the documentary short Lynching Postcards, which recounts how postcards were used as proud mementos of just the horrific terrorism against African Americans during the Jim Crow era. How did you make the decision to explore and document this particularly disturbing aspect of American history?
Yeah, I was really drawn to this subject matter at this time because of our contemporary moment and because of the killings, the murders of people like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and some of the what some people describe as modern day lynchings that have been documented and that we have all been witnessing, and have been filmed on video. And I really thought back to these postcards, which anti-lynching activists, such as the NAACP and others, had really used as evidence in their fight against lynching, and how they, as activists, took these postcards and subverted their original intent. These, as you mentioned, these were celebrations of white supremacy, and used them to indict that very white supremacy. So I was thinking a lot about the parallels to today. But of course, lynching is a subject matter that I think to some degree all of us have learned a little bit about in history. But this particular angle, these postcards are not something that I think a lot of people have been made aware of. Certainly I didn't learn about it in school, but I did come across them in research, actually for other histories that were, other documentaries looking at Black history, and just felt that they had been really underexplored, at least in documentary film, and that this could provide a new angle and a new understanding of our lynching history.
Yeah, I also, of course, thought about Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd in this, and in both the ways that just seeing this violence, just carrying on through the century,
Yeah.
but also how the fact that at least in the modern day, these images have been at least used to get justice in a couple of isolated situations, which is a little progress, but obviously not enough. Progress would be these things not happening in the first place.
Right.
So what do you think about that kind of the way that has changed, the way that imagery and the way we receive it has changed?
Yeah, it's like we're in an interesting moment, because I think that at this, it's like, how much more of this imagery, do we need, in a sense, in order to make the point that this is happening? But it seems like without that documentation, the conversation would be lost. And in the film, we explore how anti-lynching activists are able to use these postcards and use that photography and turn it around, and just in the way that we're starting to see that happen right now in this moment. And as you said, progress, of course, would be that we're not experiencing these killings, but I think it's necessary in order to help put an end to it anyway, to expose it and to make the public aware of it.
And of course, to make a film about this subject, you're must be going through this incredibly upsetting imagery. Like how long was that process, and how what was that difficult to kind of decompress from that sort of thing as you're inundated with this history?
Yes, yeah, it was very difficult to really sort of sift through all of these images, and try and process them and sit with them, and in particular in the editing process, constantly revisiting them. And I struggled with it. I struggled with, how much do we show, and what do we show, and at what moment are we showing it, and why are we showing it? And thought a lot about the presentation of that imagery and where to focus the viewer's eye, and what were the points, how was I advancing the story with each of these images. And in that process, what I realized is that sort of ongoing struggle of how, what to show and what not to show was actually the same struggle that anti-lynching activists were also dealing with, and figuring out how to use that imagery most effectively, and how to really indict the country and shame the country. And so it was difficult, very much.
And then the subtitle of the film, "Token of a Great Day," which is taken from one of those postcards, is just such a, just the concise underlining of how kind of horrific the idea of celebrating these images was at the time. Tell me about like what stood out about that particular line from a postcard to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks so much to just the mentality, the idea that, these lynchings were, they were public spectacles. Thousands of people would sometimes attend these events. They had a carnival-like atmosphere. You would have men, women, and children from, varying social classes all participating, and how, in some ways, how normalized these events were, so much so that, it was just evidence of a good time. And so that token of a great day really jumped out at me, and really speaks to how so many white citizens and participants viewed these really horrific events.
Yeah, and also, it's just striking how, in the grand scheme of things, this history is not that old. Like, this is a generation whose grandchildren are probably alive right now, if not children. Um, you know, it's just so hard to kind of put yourself in the mindset of people who would celebrate that kind of violence. Was that difficult for you as well, just to kind of see these images and see that just kind of how casual it seemed?
Yeah, very difficult. But, I felt that it was just necessary to confront that imagery. I think it's necessary as a country for us to really confront this kind of history, and necessary in order for us to move forward. And of course, we take a couple steps forward and a couple steps back. But I think that this certainly serves as a reminder of this not very distant history, and just how deeply rooted, the issues that we're seeing today, and where they emanate and where they come from. In some ways, lynching really becomes prevalent at a moment, in American history after the Civil War, and we're experiencing, Blacks are gaining rights, and they're making economic progress, and they're participating in the political process, and there is a very strong white backlash, not unsimilar to what we are seeing here today. And so I think that those parallels are there. And although the film is historical and we're looking at, a moment and moments in history, I really do feel it speaks indirectly to what we're experiencing today.
Yeah, it does seem like, sometimes two steps forward, two steps back sometimes, as we are learning about how much of history what has been kind of, buried a little bit, whether it's these postcards or the Tulsa Massacre, which we've seen in media in recent years, in Watchmen and in Lovecraft Country. And now also we've got the response to that, which is the idea of whether children should be taught anything about
Right.
racism in schools. Do you feel like things are, moving more forward than back? Like, are we inching forward, or are you worried about, just how much of a backlash we're going to have?
I mean, I think it's what you just said before. There's progress, and then of course there's some steps back overall. I think we can certainly say today, we the kinds of the type of lynching that was occurring in the past is not what we're experiencing today, and that's due in large part because of the actually African American men and women who fought against these practices. And so much of the story of the film Lynching Postcards is actually a story about Black resistance and about Black agency, and about how people really fought back against lynching, and they used these postcards in order to do so. And you mentioned the Tulsa Massacre, and of course there were postcards made of that horrific event as well. And of course, those postcards were then turned around and used to indict that event. So I think that, yes, undoubtedly we have seen tremendous progress, but I think that there's still a lot of work to do.